Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Mike Force podcast, brought to you from my hotel room in Orlando, Florida. Not used to the humidity here. It is super hot. It's like 95 with 100% humidity. But I flew in from Utah to do Brent Tucker's Tier 1 podcast. I'll link his podcast down below if you guys are interested. I wanted to do this on the Montreal shooting, and I did not want to do reacts this soon. There are important lessons learned, which I'm going to frame out on this podcast, but I think it would be disrespectful to the police officers as well as to the family, as this was released on video on social media mere minutes after it took place, which is wild to me. And I can't imagine the pain that the families are going through as they suffer through this difficult time. I am not going to exacerbate that by doing a reacts to the video. But there are important lessons learned in that. You don't even have to reference the video in order to capture those. I'll walk you through it. Most people think that survival is this naked and afraid in the woods, bushcraft, fieldcraft thing. It's about wilderness. When in reality, most people don't realize that survival can happen to you on the way to the grocery store, dropping your kids off at school. In your daily mundane and boring routine, things can change. If we're thinking about that on a scale or a graph, which is how my brain works, it's like everything is flatline, mundane and routine in your daily habits until there's this big spike. And the question is, are you prepared to deal with the spike, with the change in the pattern? Most people think survival is something that happens also after a hurricane, an earthquake, a civil unrest, or societal collapse. But the truth is, survival is often being caught in something you never saw coming. A random Tuesday, walk in your neighborhood, a routine errand or chore, a walk down the street. And suddenly, just like in this circumstance in Montreal, you're trapped in the middle. You're stuck in the middle. And that's exactly what happened. A city that many people would consider one of the safest major cities in North America, where the last officer killed in the line of duty was 24 years ago. Let that sink in. There are officers on that department who have spent their entire careers never seeing one of their own killed. Then in an instant, everything changed. Now, that's typically how catastrophe works. September 10th was a normal day. The morning of September 11th was a beautiful day. I remember it. And then everything changed in a moment. A gunman in this circumstance, armed with a rifle, opened fire. Officers responded. Gunfire was exchanged. An officer was killed. Another officer was wounded. And tragically, an innocent civilian lost his life while caught in the middle of this. Before I go any further, I want to say prayers to the officer's family, the wounded officer, and everyone affected by this tragedy, especially the innocent civilian who lost his life. I want to focus on something that most media outlets won't discuss, and that's the innocent civilian. The innocent civilian in this situation represents every one of us. The person who wasn't looking for trouble, wasn't carrying a badge, wasn't carrying a rifle, who woke up that morning, put his pants on like everybody else, and really lived a carefree existence, yet still became part of this tragedy as it unfolded. And that's the reality of modern survival that separates this from wilderness or natural catastrophe. You don't get to choose when violence finds you. You only get to choose how you respond, how you react, and how prepared you are when it does. When I started Fieldcraft Survival years ago, which I'm going to double post this on Fieldcraft Survival's YouTube channel and share as a collaboration for Mike Force, I studied survival psychology. I wanted an academic, philosophical perspective, and I wanted to understand how behavior and the central nervous system and our minds navigate these difficult situations. Because really, it's a testament to how the human body and your brain respond to stress. Because that's what it is. That graph of flat line where everything's low stress, the spike that I talk about is actually a spike of profound, immense, and intense stress. Why do people survive and why do people perish in survival situations was the question. Why do some people make good decisions under pressure while others fall apart? Why do some people survive while others freeze and are incapable of doing anything? I experienced this. I talk about it in my book, Prepared, a Manual for Surviving Worst Case Scenarios. I tell a war story, not to boast about my capabilities because I really had none. I hadn't really been tested. Sure, I trained intensely and intently focused on the training objective. But training never is a direct correlation to the realities that you'll face. The sounds are the same. Your body isn't sensing things the same. And for sure, you don't respond or react the same. But if you do train, you get closer to the real thing and you can get an understanding in your rehearsal of what it's like to operate. And that's the measure we need to focus on. Not falling in love with ourselves on a flat range because we're keyholing the target, but instead looking at what we got away with, where we were successful by getting through, not thriving, but surviving, and where we can improve and adapt in order to improve our circumstance. In John Leach's study of survival psychology, which he wrote a fascinating book called Survival Psychology, he talks about a concept of 10-80-10, a percentage of the population broken down in percentage brackets, 10%, 80%, and 10%. Roughly 10% of people immediately become effective, the top 10%. Now, what's interesting is there's not a clear understanding of why these people are in the top 10%. But that is what I spent a lot of my life over the last 10 years trying to understand. And I think I have some elements that will help you become a top 10%er, which we'll discuss. One of the things they do is they take action. They're decisive. Maybe even it's the wrong action, but they at least take action. They assess. They observe the situation, the environment, and they make that decision rapidly. And they're not panicked. The 80% bracket doesn't solve problems like the top 10%, but they get over the situation and often survive. About half of the 80% survive and half don't, but they often become overwhelmed. Not panicked, just confused. Like, why is this happening? What's going on? And they ponder, they contemplate. When I wrote Prepared, one of the worst stories that I told was of a circumstance where I expected contact with the enemy to be direct. I trained walking through the woods and reacting to contact. We call it immediate action drills, that is lined out by Field Manual 7-8. Battlefield infantry tactics, small unit tactics. But in this situation, in my first gunfight in Afghanistan, it wasn't a gunfight. In fact, there was no gunfire really exchanged from the enemy outside of a 107 millimeter rocket. That sounds like a freight train that has a very large kill radius. And so where I expected to meet the enemy head on, they were hiding in the mountains, kilometers away, lobbing 107 millimeter self-stabilizing rockets at our firebase. And often in that 80% bracket, they wait and look for direction. Where I knew the immediate action drill for reacting to contact under small arms fire, I didn't really understand how to react and respond when I was in the open, in the middle of a helicopter landing zone, and how to basically think through the situation, critically think through the situation. That 80% bracket tries to process what they're seeing, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. In my case, because I knew how to critically think and make rapid decisions, I was able to be a top 10%er. But I would say I was in the upper echelons of that 80% bracket, whereby it was unfamiliar, but I had the tools to get through it. The bottom 10% completely lose control. They freeze, they panic, and often become ineffective. They die. They aren't the ones that survive. The scary thing about the middle 80% is most of them don't even realize it's happening. They think they are acting, but they're really just observing and waiting, trying to understand while their brain is processing information. Because there's not a programmed immediate action drill built in. And while you're trying to understand, the situation and environment is changing rapidly. And bullets, unfortunately, don't wait for comprehension. Violence doesn't wait for clarity or focus or even action. What's fascinating about this incident is that it happened in Canada. Not because Canada is immune to violence. There's many situations where I've talked about in reacting to videos or news stories that took place in Canada. But because most Canadians don't live with the same exposure to violent crime that Americans do. Now, that's not really a good thing, obviously. But in some American cities, shootings happen in such a frequency that it becomes background noise. I did a study of the shootings and deaths in Chicago as compared to the war in Iraq. And over the same time period, more people were killed in Chicago. That's alarming. But it's also Baltimore, St. Louis, Memphis, Philadelphia. In some of these cities, shootings occur weekly, and in some cases daily. Officers are assaulted regularly, and officers lose their lives. But they're also exposed. In Montreal, an officer going 24 years without a line of duty death is a reminder of how uncommon these events are. So the danger isn't just violence itself, it's unfamiliar violence, which leads to complacency. When people believe something can't happen where they live, they stop preparing for it completely. And when it finally does happen, they're caught completely off guard. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is that if something bad happens, police will protect them. We've been talking about this at Fieldcraft for years, that you are your own first response. The other day I was on Facebook doom scrolling, and I read an article about, it was actually a note from somebody about an article where they said that the government's not stepping in and doing their job, and they felt fearful because there were not warning signs and things went wrong. And I rarely comment, but in this case, I commented and said, you are your own first response. You need to be more self-reliant. Thinking that the government or an institution, even police officers in your own town, are going to save you when the worst case scenario happens is fiction. It's a false narrative. You've been miseducated and misguided. The reality is you need to cut the umbilical cord and lean in on your own reliance and dependence to take care of yourself and your own family, even your own community in some cases. And that's a hard pill to swallow for many people. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is that if something happens, a first responder's job is to be there in seconds. When we know the response time across the country, which is varying depending on where you live, urban or rural, is minutes. And when seconds count, police officers and first responders are minutes away. So that's not how reality works, and that's not a criticism of law enforcement. It's just the reality. They are moving towards the danger while everyone else is moving away. That's true. Their focus is finding the shooter. But your responsibility as a civilian is to survive. The civilian killed during this event is a tragic reminder of that reality. I watched the video and it was difficult to watch, but I understood exactly what happened. When bullets start flying, nobody gets to pause the fight. It is very fluid and it's happening at a rapid pace. Chaos is chaos, which means your first responsibility is getting yourself and your family out of the geometry of the fight. I call this getting off the X with distance, cover, movement. The officer at the end of the video, the female officer who tragically made the mistake of misidentifying this innocent civilian, she broke contact off the X at one point, really late in the circumstance, as she was ducking and covering behind cover and concealment. Remember, cover stops bullets, concealment conceals yourself, but does not make you immune from bullets. As she's sitting there, she's also turning off her situational awareness because she can't see. And she's hiding in a position, and in some cases, that's good. We're taught in the infantry to seek immediate cover while under fire. But at the same time, we're taught to maintain a heads-up display to identify the direction and distance and disposition of the enemy. So as I take contact and I'm running to cover, I need to identify where the enemy's at, the distance, and what it's made of. Is it one guy? Is it two guys? And then as I'm running to cover, I'm communicating that information to give my teammates a cheat sheet on situational awareness if they didn't see it. At least they can get vectored into the general direction. Those three things that I just described, distance, cover, and movement, save lives. Distance, which is equitable to time, also facilitates putting as many obstacles in between you and the threat as you create distance. It is very difficult, even with the most experienced operators, to hit a moving target day and night. Why? Because it's not instinctive. It requires a different shot process visually. And if you don't understand the technique of ambushing, meaning getting ahead of the target and breaking the shot, or tracking, then you're not going to be very good at it. Remember, a lot of the training we do on flat ranges is done static, sitting still. And that's a huge disadvantage, because not only are we not learning the techniques for engaging a moving threat, that might be a bad guy moving and shooting in your direction, but we don't understand how it is to defend ourselves against that moving target the same. The best advice I have for you is you need to move as quickly as possible, perpendicular to the target. Because if you're creating distance, moving in line or out of line, then you're a target that's this wide when you're standing where I'm standing. And then as I create distance, you're a target this wide, which means the shooter does not have to deviate much. This is a miss, this is a hit. But if you move perpendicular to the threat, moving away from it, then what you're doing is you're taking the shooter's position, and he has to deviate and track you, which is difficult to do. So if you're doing both, creating distance and moving perpendicular, you're making it harder to be killed. Preparedness is understanding that bad things happen, and deciding ahead of time is how you'll survive, because you'll be set up for success. When I walk into a restaurant, for example, I look for exits. Typically, I sit near the trash can because the trash can is located near the exit, so you can take the trash out. You don't have to walk through customers while they're eating their food. You can just walk out the back door. That's typically where you'll find me. Now, I don't do it intentionally. I do it really subconsciously now. But when I walk into a hotel like this hotel, I take the stairs because I want to identify the closest exit. So I don't take the elevator to my room and just check out when I check in. I walk the perimeter and gain some situational awareness. I do that when I'm at an Airbnb, when I'm at a hotel, when I'm at a base camp setup. When we went camping with a family over the weekend with my kids, I wanted to be sure there wasn't a cougar den, a mountain lion den. I wanted to be sure there wasn't any obstacles they were going to run their bicycles into. And so I walked the perimeter with my kids and checked out the surrounding area to build situational awareness so I could process information. The biggest lesson from Montreal isn't about Canada. It's not about guns or politics. That will be brought up for sure. It's about responsibility. Now, the innocent man that was killed, who was just standing around. There was also an older gentleman that was standing around who didn't react or respond at all, likely frozen in place, trying to process what was happening. Could this be? That contemplation is often what gets people killed. You've heard it, it's the deer in the headlights. Part of it is the central nervous system going into freeze because it is hypo-aroused, not hyper-aroused, but hypo-aroused. And that freeze technique, because it is a technique in survival, is a natural instinct. It's built into you. It is part of the fight, flight, or freeze response. But it's not freezing as the enemy bypasses so you can break contact, because that's critical thinking. It's freezing in that your system shut down as a survival mechanism to survive. And it comes from our primal or ancestral genetics or epigenetics. We freeze and we don't move. There's opiates, natural opiates that are actually pressed into your system. Amanda Ripley's book, Unthinkable, talks about this when one of the innocent students in the Virginia Tech shooting hid under his desk and he thought he was shot as the shooter was going desk to desk, killing many in his class. And he couldn't move. He felt paralysis and he wasn't shot. He was just hypo-aroused. And his body had natural opiates in it to freeze him in place. And it locked him and trapped him in his own body. So that innocent civilian who walks up to the police officer, he walks up to it because he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't understand the circumstance. And he sees an officer. So the natural thing for him to do is go up to the officer and ask for help. And instead of help, he received a rounds to his body and he tragically passed away. What is the lesson learned? Standing still is not action. It's paralysis. The best thing you could do when things kick off is move your physical body. You can call 911 en route. You could text your loved ones about it later. Move your physical body and start maneuvering away from the X as quickly as possible. The truth is most of us will never be the hero. Most of us will never be the police officer running towards gunfire. Most of us obviously will not be the attacker. Most of us are the innocent civilian, the husband, the wife, the friend, the father, the mother, the bystander, the person simply trying to get through another day. meaning you're going to be the one caught in the middle. When violence erupts unexpectedly, you're not choosing between perfect options, you're choosing between bad ones. I always tell people it's about what you can get away with. And the preparation is going to set you up for success for that. And remember, you're reacting under stress. So if you're training on a flat range on a 75-degree day, that's a thing. Have fun. But also always introduce stress. In the early days of Fieldcraft Survival, I used to make my students do exercises, kettlebell swings, running with dumbbells. And people would always say, that's dumb. Why would you do that? Look at this guy on the range running around. Because I want to stress your physical body doing high intensity intervals. At the same time, in certain specific moments, you have to hard focus to break the shot, to find a balance. Because you need to be able to shoot, move, and communicate while under the pressures of stress. So training matters, but so does awareness. So does mindset, and so does preparation. The officer who lost his life that day, yesterday, answered a call and never came home. An innocent civilian found themselves caught in the middle. They never asked to be part of that, and they never came home. Both are reminders that tragedy doesn't schedule itself. Your worst day could be today. There are people right now who are living through their worst day. On the way on vacation to have and build amazing memories with my children, we witnessed a rollover accident that cost somebody their lives because they weren't paying attention. They rammed the rear of a vehicle, flipped into a field because they weren't paying attention. Where I was having the best day of my life, they were having the worst. Preparedness is your responsibility. If you're a man or a woman and the leader of your home, then it's time to get off the bench and do something about it. You have to be responsible for yourself and your family. And responsibility for understanding that while you can't control when evil appears, you can control how ready you are when it does. And in a world where violence can find you anywhere, the responsibility has never been more important. I'm going to talk about a breakdown on my Patreon on the 4 skill sets. I broke it down to 4, just distilling some information on things that you could do to survive a circumstance like this. It's linked below in my Patreon, absolutely free. You just need to be a member. And I appreciate you guys tuning in. Till next time. Bye, guys.